Hi, folks. This is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc, and I'm here with my lovely wife, Janae, the Carb Addiction Mom. And I guess I don't see this as a risk, but today's discussion is going to be exposure of huge personal vulnerability. And Janae and I have debated this back and forth whether we should tell the story, and it is very personal to us. But I think it is an important story. The story is so important in terms of helping other people out there. And if our experience can help anybody to deal with what we're going to talk about today, then our vulnerability, our exposure is well worth it. Because when things that could be shameful, that are personal, are exposed to sunlight, you can see the sunlight behind me, shame withers away. And this happened. We're not ashamed of it. And we are happy to say that we are beginning to climb out of this hole. But today's discussion is about postpartum depression, PPD. And I'm going to have Janae tell her story, and afterwards we'll break it down a little bit more from a treatment and a therapeutic perspective and understand some of what's going on there. But Janae, why don't you tell your story?
Okay. Like Rob said, we're happy to tell the story because if we can help another person, then it's all worth it to us. So I think for those of you who have followed our journey along our pregnancy and through the birth of our son, Rian, you know that I had pretty much the most perfect pregnancy anybody could ask for, and birth to the same regard. So you know, I was ketovore, I say, more on the carnivore side than keto for the entire pregnancy. I felt fabulous physically. I had a great, just really, really easy pregnancy. And same with our birth. We did have a C-section birth. It was very effortless. I only took one Motrin after the birth of our son, and that's only because the hospital made me. I wouldn't have taken any if it was up to me. We were discharged less than 24 hours later, and physically I bounced back like that. 11 days postpartum, I was already back to my pre-pregnancy weight. I was continuing more on the carnivore side of things. And I really, again, physically just did phenomenally. I had no issues whatsoever. And then about 5 weeks after the birth of our son, I got hit like a ton of bricks. And it was postpartum depression and anxiety. And I have never felt anything like that before. I didn't even know what anxiety felt like. So it literally hit me out of nowhere. But to the point where I couldn't even really function. So for those of you who know me know I'm really always positive and upbeat. And I just got hit like a ton of bricks. I remember one Friday night, I literally had a panic attack in the middle of the night. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was going to vomit. I had such a nervousness in my stomach that I couldn't sleep, so I was just pacing around the house. And I was just devastated because, again, I had done so well physically and everything seemed to be so perfect. And so Rob was, trying his best and doing everything he could to help me through it, but I was just in a really, really bad place. So, I basically was having really irrational thoughts, even though I tend to be a really rational and level thinker. Even my friends say they're surprised that I went through it because I tend to be so rational with my thoughts in my everyday life. But all I could think was that I wasn't fit to be a mother, that I was totally unprepared to become a mother, and that there was no other option in my head besides, the Department of Family Services coming and taking my child away from me and my whole life crumbling. I thought there's no way Rob could live with me like this, that we would end up getting divorced. It was just a really, really bad time. And I've read articles about other women with postpartum depression saying that it was the the darkest time of their life. And I would have to admit that because, like I said, I've never experienced anything like that in my entire life. So I'm really lucky in that I have a great support system in Rob and my family. My mom was able to fly out on a day's notice, even during COVID times, which was really scary in and of itself. But I have the most supportive parents in the world, so they came to help me immediately. And it's been quite a journey, so that's why I've been sort of quiet lately on social media. I didn't feel like doing anything. It was just hard for me to get out of bed during the days and to be a mother to my son, and it was just a struggle every day. But I'm very happy to say that, like Rob said, in the last about 2 weeks, I've really turned a corner and I'm feeling so much better.
We're about 3-4 months in.
About 2.
2 months in.
Yeah. So I just want to tell everybody out there, women, and luckily I think a part of, when I got hit with it, I was not afraid to talk about it. I know a lot of women are, but I was telling everybody who was close to me. I was telling my friends, my family, my colleagues that I'm close with. I wasn't shy about it at all because I knew right away what I was experiencing and that I needed help. So I reached out right away and said, I need help. I just knew I couldn't go on like that. So I think that is an important piece, is if you are struggling with postpartum depression or anxiety, that you actually admit it, are able to admit it, talk with friends, family, ask for help. It was incredibly helpful to me to do those things because I even attended a postpartum support group, and I did a couple counseling sessions. But what I found was that those weren't all that helpful to me because it was basically other women telling their stories, and a lot of women found comfort in the fact that other women were experiencing that. But I already knew that other women experienced it because I had talked with so many of my friends about it. And it's amazing when you reach out to people how many personal stories you start hearing back of people that you never knew experienced it. A lot of my close friends that I never knew went through postpartum with their children, once I told them, said, oh yeah, I experienced that with my first or my second or whatever, and would tell me their personal stories about how their child basically laid on the floor for 6 months, the first 6 months of their life, because the mother was non-functional. So it's really amazing to hear people. I mean, almost everywhere I turned, somebody had a story of either themselves experiencing it or their sister or their aunt or somebody like that. So it was really amazing to see that just the support and the sharing of stories was so helpful. So like I said, I did attend one support group meeting and a couple counseling sessions. I ended up stopping those because, like I said, it wasn't that helpful to me, but I encourage anybody who is going through it, who has maybe a more difficult time talking to their friends and family about it, that's an absolute wonderful place to find comfort and to hear the other stories and to know that you're not alone. So, that's definitely an option for some people. And like I said, I'm just so happy to let you all know that I feel so much better now. I really, there was a time when I said, I'm not going to do anything for Thanksgiving this year, and I'm not going to put up Christmas decorations or anything because I just didn't feel like doing anything. And those are my favorite times of the year. So, but this last week for Thanksgiving, I cooked a whole meal. And just yesterday, I decorated the entire house for Christmas. So, I really do feel like I'm getting back to myself finally. So just wanted to share that personal story with you all, and I just really appreciate all of your support as well.
Thanks, Janae. I think, folks, the most important part about this entire discussion, I'm going to break some things down and give some guidance and advice based on my experience and my knowledge, but ultimately, the most important thing is telling your story. Don't ever be ashamed or afraid to tell your story. There are going to be people out there that support you. There are going to be people out there that criticize you. And there are going to be people out there that give you harmful feedback. Ignore the critics. They're trolls. They're everywhere. They're trolls. They're saying things to hurt you for their own benefit. The best support the best support a family member or friend can do, in my personal experience, is just being there, being present, being that shoulder for that person to lean on, having the empathetic human connection to know that Janae can trust you and implicitly know that you are not going to be judgmental or critical, but you're just creating a warm space, a safe space. Just be there. Don't isolate. It affected me tremendously. I'm a physician. I deal with emotion management for a living. I am the carb addiction doc. And it was tough to just be there and watch someone I love more than anything else fall apart and then rebuild their lives. I didn't offer advice. I didn't give guidance or say, do this or do that. I was present, as difficult as that was for me, because I had what I thought was some good advice, but not then. Just be there. Don't isolate. Accept that it's happening. Don't condemn. Don't criticize. Don't think of that person as being weak. It's a phase we go through, and I'm going to explain that in a second. Don't offer solutions. Be busy in the background. Maybe help with the housekeeping, help with the baby, help be of service in a practical and pragmatic way. But advice is not needed. Just the presence of a loving, warm body and embracing and accepting and being there. That's the first, most important bit of advice I can give. The second thing is be aware of it. Have awareness. This was probably the greatest revelation that I've had, is how this caught both of us by surprise. When I look at Janae, and I've spoken about her, she has pretty close to zero vulnerability to addictive behavior. The diversity of her effort-based emotion management systems, it is enormous. She's physically active every day. She's keto, and she's been keto carnivore throughout the pregnancy and beyond, even through this PPD. She didn't lean back on carbohydrates. Although we talked about it a few times, it didn't happen. But she doesn't do drugs. She's got physical activity. She's got a very, very close relationship with a higher power. From a spiritual perspective, she's strong. She has a variety of creative things that she loves to do. Although those went to hell in a handbasket during this time, the creative art side collapsed and went away. We couldn't play cribbage, we couldn't play our games, we couldn't do anything. Music did happen though. Music gave her some buoyancy. And the fourth pillar of an empathetic of a effort-based emotion management system is the fact that she reached out to people. She reached out to a close friend. She reached out to her mother. She reached out to us. She reached out to support groups, to therapists. She connected in an empathetic, human way with other people to help her to get that upliftment. So physical activity, creative art, spirituality, and empathetic human connection are present in her life, and yet despite that, she plunged into this hole. So the question is why? And as we analyze that, because she's the least likely person to have had this happen under normal conditions. So why? Number one, she had an elective C-section. And there were certain reasons why she needed to have that C-section, but it means she didn't go into labor. We preordained the date and then had the C-section. So there was a sudden hormonal change. And there's no question that the process of labor, the process of going through childbirth, whether you go into labor and then have a C-section or have the natural childbirth, all of those hormonal changes that happen are very, very positive in preventing this. Janae went from the hormonal background of being pregnant to nothing, bupkis, zero. C-section. Complete removal of that hormonal background. And when we tested that, her estrogen, her progesterone, her DHEA, her testosterone levels were in the toilet. They were missing. And then on top of that, she didn't produce enough prolactin. She didn't produce enough hormones from her brain to adequately breastfeed. Yes, she breastfed, she pumped, she expressed milk. But we needed some support just to get breast milk going. And I think some of the support that was there to encourage breast milk also devastated her natural hormonal milieu. So while we have a huge amount of bank breast milk, one of the decisions we made was that breastfeeding for her was not of value. It was a liability because it triggered so much fear and so much anxiety. So we stopped the breastfeeding and we bottle fed. And that was a very, very difficult decision because obviously on a ketogenic diet, on a carnivore diet, that is so important and we've talked about it so often. But it was in the best interests of the mother to stop breastfeeding, to rescue her from this postpartum depression. And in fact, it rescued her from being this awful person who's not good enough to take care of her baby in a distorted way, which obviously she's one of the best moms out there. But it changed that perception, so she was no longer burdened by that. And I know that sounds a little bit odd and bizarre, but it was one of the best moves we made. The second thing is early recognition. And here's where I'm going to be very antagonistic to anybody that ever says you should just tough it out, just struggle through it. The risk of doing that, number one, is suicide. Number two, infanticide or hurting your baby. And nobody ever wants those two things to happen, and we read about that in the newspaper very often. The third, lesser risks, but still very, very important risks, are risks of not bonding with the baby, of destruction of the relationship with family, other children in the family, if they are. We don't have, the two of us do not have other kids. But that isolationism, that depression, that anxiety, that insecurity, that fear, that closed-mindedness, as Janae said, not feeling good enough, affects everybody around you as well. And here's the thing. Even though I knew what was going on, men get depressed as well. Men have postpartum depression, not as deeply and as dramatically as women, but certainly something to recognize, and the men must just muscle their way through. What helped me was to be able to support her and carry her through those tough times. But it happened to both of us. So understanding that the risks of severe postpartum depression can be devastating. So don't bullshit me and tell me you've got to muscle your way through. Just suck it up, it'll go away. Use medication, folks. Use medication as a rescue. So what did we do? We have a close friend who's a psychiatrist who helped us with this. But I already knew what to do, but I wasn't able to prescribe. Number one, we used benzodiazepines, very sparingly, but we used Ativan. When Janae, what triggered you to, when it was done on a PRN basis, only when needed, and she was very cognizant of the addictive nature, but there were times when the Ativan was a powerful rescue. Especially early on, by the way, folks, before some of the other medications kick in, even though you're taking them, some of the other medications I'm going to talk about may take a week or two to kick in, and the Ativan was a huge rescue early on. Why would you take it? What demonstrated you taking it?
Yeah, so for those of you who know me personally, you know that I hate taking medications. Anything that is a medication, I don't want to take it unless absolutely necessary. So I was really, really upset about needing to take something like Ativan because I knew it was very addictive and I hate taking medications anyway. But I will tell you that I feel like it literally saved my life. I only took it for about a week, and then maybe 2 or 3 other times when I had an acute onset of anxiety. Like I said, I never knew what anxiety felt like prior to this experience. So for those of you who suffer with anxiety disorder, my heart just breaks for you because I have never experienced anything like that. But I had such a nervousness in my stomach that literally it was creating a visceral response. I mean, I felt like I was going to throw up. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit still. It was just a horrible, horrible feeling. So that first week when I was able to get that Ativan on board, it literally saved my life, I think, because the only other thing I was doing was begging Rob to check me into the psych ward because I knew what was going on, but I could not overcome the irrational thoughts. So that was really, really helpful to me. And again, only took it for about a week and then maybe 2 or 3 other times when I really got hit with that sense of anxiety. But it was very helpful in that moment.
And I think, folks, Janae brings up an important point, is that, yeah, there are some people who are peri-suicidal or infanticidal that are best admitted to the hospitals. However, the amount of drug therapy is overwhelming in the hospitals because they use a blunderbuss approach. And that may be necessary for certain people, but do not condemn the fact that she needed Ativan as a rescue. Now, I understand, and we both understand, that they are highly, highly addictive. And fortunately, Janae does not have, she has an awareness and she does not have an addictive personality. And there are plenty of people that have been addicted to benzodiazepines, and they're incredibly difficult to come off. But don't condemn them as a class of therapy under the specific conditions by which they were meant to be used. Not as just some global make me feel good, but as a rescue for a very, very awful alternative. So we used the benzodiazepines, especially early on. And then the second thing that we did is we placed Janae on two antidepressants. One is Wellbutrin at a very low dose, at half the regular dose. And then we added an SSRI, in this case Zoloft. And we added those two medications not as a treatment, but as a safety net. Because what Janae told me is that she felt like when she looked down, there was just this bottomless pit. There was nothing. There was no floor to her life. And what the antidepressant medications did is they created a safety net. She knew she was in free fall, but at least they gave her a safety net. And the problem with them is they take a week or two to work. You have to build up those levels. And the Ativan was used during that week or two to manage anxiety, not regularly, not scheduled as a dose, but when needed. And then as soon as those antidepressants kicked in, we knew that we would be using them for a few months to give her stability as she went through the doldrums and came back on the other side. And slowly we started doing the effort-based emotion management systems, trying to get her out of the house, trying to go for a walk. At first, it was just getting in the car and going for a drive. At least seeing things beyond this world. And folks, one of the most devastating things about COVID and the argument against the lockdown, although I favor the lockdown, is that isolationism within the house. Isolationism from your family and friends, isolation from the environment, isolation from being outside. And we had to get Janae, force her into the car and go for that drive. And fortunately, my mother-in-law was able to come by and give her some buoyancy, someone to talk to. And then the other shout out is to her company. She works for IBM, and they were fabulous in terms of giving her maternal leave, giving her full support, and allowing her not to work during this time. Even though those maternal benefits are important, IBM was very supportive, giving us great health care, giving us that time off work where she could recover quietly. Now, her colleagues at work were also very, very supportive, but the medications were there as a rescue. Do not condemn them, because the alternative, doing self-harm or doing harm, is far, far worse. And yes, when we went on the medication, the day we started the medication, we had a strategy for disengagement, for deprescribing. We've been on the medication for a couple of months, and we're now, you don't stop the medication, but you slowly reduce the dose as you know you're coming out of it. And that's what we've begun to do. The Ativan's long gone, and we're now getting her off the other two medications. 3 to 4 months on the medication, not a problem. Incredibly useful, but you don't need to be on it forever. But you need to rebuild an effort-based emotion management system that then replaces the need to be on those medications. So there's no question that recovery is so important. And as part of recovery is therapy. And it's mostly talk therapy. It's having empathy from people, whether you buy that from a psychologist or a mental health counselor. And there's incredible value there to people that just listen, not necessarily offering a lot of advice, but listening to your story or having family and friends around you. And then the other part is, as Janae said, she cooked a fabulous carnivore turkey for us from scratch. Boom, there it was. I could tell that she was in recovery. Last night, she put up our Christmas tree. and decorated it and had music on, and you can tell when somebody starts re-engaging that they're starting to recover. Our relationship is stronger now than it's ever been. And her relationship with our son Rian is so powerful. I understand for a while, for a week or two, it was very difficult for her to engage with Rian because she felt that she wasn't good enough. But guess what, folks? She's re-engaged on her own time. She's come back, and now she's the most important person in that baby's life. And eventually, Janae even went back to work, started working, and is back with her colleagues, back at work online, and that's become part of the emotional rescue. But there was a period of time where she could not work, and IBM supported her through that. Thanks, guys. So I think that it is so important to understand that you want to be prepared and recognize this disease. And we've spoken to folks who didn't have it with their first pregnancy, but had it with the second one. Didn't have it with or had it with the first, didn't have it with the second. All of those things change. And then one other comment is just a shout out to a lady by the name of Julie, the pharmacist late on a Saturday night, who was able to give us the medication that we desperately needed. I'm not sure we could have lasted through the weekend when this first hit. So shout out to the doctor that prescribed the medication and to Julie who provided it for us, especially under these times of severe restraint on some of the psychotropic medications, which is warranted, but a liability when you're treating someone with a real illness. Folks, do not take postpartum depression for granted. It is a very serious, severe illness. Comes very unexpectedly at a time when you should be at your happiest. Oh, by the way, there's one other thing that was critically important and such a frustration. Because after you give birth, there's a continuous bleeding and oozing and hormonal upset for anywhere from 6 to 14 days or longer after giving birth. That's normal. It's natural. It's how the uterus involutes. However, during that time, if you suffer from profound ovarian failure or hormonal failure, you can't substitute with female hormones. And one of the most important parts to this recovery, along with the antidepressant and anxiolytic medications, was getting Janae back on the pill, on hormone replacement. And I think that regulation of her hormonal cycle was as important as everything else in terms of restoring health. And even if you don't want to take that pill for a long period of time, for many cycles, that's fine. But it is a valuable, valuable asset. Female hormonal regulation is as critically important as everything else to the recovery phase. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, folks. There is recovery. It's an ongoing process, but it's like a switch goes off and you're back. And you can criticize us, you can condemn us, or you can feel compassion and perhaps help a family member, help a friend to recognize and not feel ashamed of the fact that they do not feel good enough to be a mother, do not feel good enough to take care of their baby, even dislike their baby for a little while. Don't condemn them for that. Support them through that. Be compassionate to yourself if you're a mom that's going through a pregnancy, to family members, to your children, to your brothers, to your sisters, and to your friends. This is a very, very common disease. And emotional buoyancy is required on your behalf until she regains it.
And I would say that the support of your partner is so critically important, like Rob said. One of the things I heard when I attended a support group for postpartum was that there were many women out there who didn't have a supportive partner, and my heart was breaking for them because I knew that I wouldn't have made it through it without Rob's support. So please, again, like Rob said, recognize that it can happen to anybody. I had pretty much the most perfect pregnancy and birth that anybody could have ever imagined. And physically, I felt absolutely phenomenal, and I still feel physically phenomenal. But mentally, I just took a total dive, and never would have expected it, but was so thankful for the support of my husband, my family, my friends. So please support those around you.
Just one other comment also is that, and this is a sad comment, but the majority of doctors, even the gynecologists, the obstetricians out there, they're aware of the disorder, but they have no clue how severe it is and have no clue as to how to manage it. Use this video, folks. Use this video for yourselves to show to your healthcare providers, to let them understand that this is a very, very serious disorder, because we do not want to read about you in the newspaper. And sadly, we so often do, and then we condemn those people for what they've done. How can they do that? We've lived through this. We have an algorithm of care. Please reach out to me if you need help in that regard. But understand that most often, your family doctor, your obstetrician, your pediatrician does not understand the severity of what you're going through. Number two, may not have the compassion. And number three, most often doesn't have the ability to support you like a medical physician should. And this is a time when the script pad is needed. I hope this helps. Leave comments. If we've helped you to understand this disease, I think there's benefit. And throw us a cup of coffee at our Patreon account at Carb Addiction Doc. And also follow Janae. She's the Carb Addiction Mom on Instagram, as she recovers and as she comes back. Thank you.